Hello everyone and welcome back. In this section we will have a look at a few tips and tricks for dealing with data marshaling and unmarshaling. For starters, we're going to have a look at how you can encode and decode JSON data directly from streams, or to be more precise, from I/O reader and I/O writer instances. This is how JSON encoding and decoding usually works. When encoding, you call the JSON.marshal function, which returns a byte array. And when decoding, you call JSON.unmarshal with a byte array as a parameter and an empty target object, and it will fill the target object with the values from the JSON string. However, in many cases, when you are encoding JSON data, you might want to pipe it somewhere else, for example into a file or into an HTTP response. And the same also goes for decoding JSON. In this case, the incoming JSON data that you want to pass might come from a file that you've opened for reading or from an HTTP request. In general, input and output streams, like files and HTTP messages in Go, are represented using the I/O reader and I/O writer interfaces. Many functions accept readers or writers as parameters without actually having to concern themselves with the actual implementation of these interfaces. And this is how decoding JSON from an I/O reader object might look like. To directly decode JSON from a stream, instantiate a new JSON decoder using the newDecoder function. That function takes an I/O reader as parameter. In this example, that's an open file, but in practice it could really be anything, like for example an HTTP request body or anything else that implements I/O reader. Then, on that decoder, call the decode method with a pointer to an empty target structure. Encoding JSON into an I/O writer works similar. Create a new encoder using the newEncoder function, and that function takes an I/O writer as a parameter, which in this case is a file, but again, can actually be pretty much anything, like for example also an HTTP response body. Then on that encoder, call the encode method to write the JSON data into that writer. Working with encoders and decoders that accept I/O writers and I/O readers is a common pattern among Go libraries that offer data encoding. Many libraries, like in this example for YAML, XML, and message pack encoding, all offer the same functions that work exactly the same way as just shown with the standard JSON library. Directly encoding and decoding from streams often makes things a little easier to handle, especially when you're working with larger datasets.